What if the mind could see, not through knowledge, memory, or belief, but directly, clearly, and freely? Krishnamurti asked, can we look without the past? In a world obsessed with becoming, he invited us to simply see. This is not a teaching. It is an exploration of silence, perception, and truth, a journey to the edge of thought itself. Let us begin. Before we start, comment where you're watching from. Subscribe. Tomorrow's story is even crazier. You wake to the sound of your phone buzzing against the wooden nightstand. Before your eyes have fully opened, before you have even remembered who you are or where you are, your hand reaches for it. The screen glows with notifications, messages, emails, news alerts, reminders of tasks undone, and appointments approaching. The day has not yet begun, and already it demands your attention. This is how it always starts. This reaching, this grasping, this immediate surrender to the noise that fills every moment from the instant consciousness returns until it mercifully retreats again into sleep. You sit on the edge of your bed, thumb scrolling through updates from lives you barely know, absorbing fragments of information that feel urgent but leave no lasting trace. Outside your window, the world is already in motion. Cars stream along the street in endless procession, their drivers staring ahead with expressions of determined blankness. Pedestrians hurry past on sidewalks, each one lost in their own bubble of preoccupation, some talking to invisible companions through wireless earbuds, others squinting at glowing screens as they walk. The noise is not just sound, it is the constant chattering of a mind that knows no rest, the endless commentary that accompanies every moment, every sensation, every fleeting thought. It is the voice that tells you who you are, what you should want, how you should feel. It is the narrator of a story that never pauses, never questions its own authority, never stops long enough to ask, who is listening? You shower with the radio playing news that makes you feel informed and anxious simultaneously. You eat breakfast while checking email, drink coffee while reading headlines about distant crises that feel both urgent and powerless to affect. Every moment is filled, layered with multiple streams of input that create the illusion of a full life while leaving you somehow emptier than before. On the train to work, you observe the familiar ritual of avoidance. Rows of people sitting inches from one another, each sealed in their private world of devices and distractions. The young woman across from you scrolls through images of other people's lives, her face cycling through micro-expressions of envy, amusement, and judgment. The businessman beside you speaks loudly into his phone about deals and meetings, his voice carrying the weight of his own importance. But occasionally, just for a moment, you catch someone's eye in the reflection of the window, and something passes between you. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, a brief acknowledgement of the strange absurdity of this shared solitude. Then the moment passes, and you both return to your separate screens, your private noise. At work, the cacophony intensifies. Meetings about meetings, emails about emails, urgent projects that will be forgotten by next month. You find yourself speaking words you do not really mean to people whose names you sometimes forget. You nod and smile and agree and disagree, according to patterns learned so long ago you cannot remember learning them. Yet underneath all this motion, all this apparent purpose, something stirs. A small, quiet voice that asks uncomfortable questions. Why are you always busy but never satisfied? Why does achievement feel hollow the moment it is reached? Why do you fill every silence with noise, every pause with activity? The question comes not as a thought but as a feeling, a sense that something essential is missing from this carefully constructed life. It appears in the moments between activities, in the pause between one breath and the next, in the split second when you forget to maintain the story of who you are supposed to be. Walking home through the city as evening falls, you notice how the artificial lights have erased the stars. The sky, once a source of wonder and mystery, has become merely a dark ceiling reflecting the glow of the world below. Children no longer learn the names of constellations because they cannot see them. The vastness that once reminded humans of their place in something larger has been replaced by the more manageable infinity of the internet. You pass a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk, and for a moment your eyes meet. In his gaze, you see something that unsettles you, not because it is hopeless, but because it seems to see through the elaborate performance that occupies your days. He nods slightly, as if recognizing something in you that you do not recognize in yourself. Back home, you try to settle into evening routines designed to create calm. Herbal tea, gentle music, perhaps a book or a meditation app. But the noise follows you even here. The mind continues its commentary, planning tomorrow, reviewing today, creating endless variations on the theme of yourself. You lie in bed scrolling through your phone one last time, bathing in blue light that tells your brain to stay alert even as your body craves rest. The last thing you see before sleep is another person's curated version of happiness, a photograph of a sunset they probably watched through their phone screen, a quote about mindfulness shared by someone whose life seems as frantically busy as your own. And in the moment before sleep takes you, the question returns with greater urgency. What if none of this is real? What if the person you think you are is simply a collection of habits, reactions, and borrowed ideas? What if everything you call your life is just noise covering something you have forgotten how to hear? The question hangs in the darkness like a bell that has been struck. Its resonance will follow you into sleep and wake with you tomorrow, growing stronger each time you notice it, becoming impossible to ignore. The mirror speaks only truth, but most people have forgotten how to look into it without immediately turning away. You stand before your bathroom mirror each morning, seeing not your face, but the story you tell about your face. Too tired, too old, not quite right. The reflection becomes a commentary rather than a simple fact of light and surface. This is how thought works. It takes the immediate, the present, the simply real, and turns it into something else, a judgment, a comparison, a problem to be solved. You see a tree and immediately categorize it. Oak, beautiful, needs trimming, reminds me of childhood. The tree itself disappears behind the avalanche of associations. Thought is not the enemy, but it is not your friend either. It is a tool that has forgotten its purpose and now runs constantly, like a radio left on in an empty room. It creates the illusion that the running commentary is more real than what is being commented upon. You watch a sunset and find yourself thinking about other sunsets, better sunsets, the sunset you saw on vacation last year. The actual sunset, this light, this sky, this unrepeatable moment, becomes secondary to the mental catalog of sunset experiences you are constantly updating and comparing. In conversation, you listen not to what the other person is saying but to what you will say next. Their words become prompts for your own performance rather than communications to be received. The relationship happens not between two people, but between two collections of memories, expectations, and rehearsed responses. Krishnamurti said, that thought is the response of memory, and memory is dead. It is the accumulation of what has been, trying to understand what is, but what is cannot be captured in the net of what was. Life happens in the present moment, and thought always arrives a moment too late, like trying to catch your own shadow. Watch how thought creates time. In reality, there is only now, this breath, this heartbeat, this sensation of aliveness. But thought creates yesterday and tomorrow, making you live everywhere except where you actually are. You eat lunch while thinking about dinner, spend dinner thinking about tomorrow's meetings, spend meetings thinking about the weekend. The mind becomes a time machine stuck on shuffle, playing random moments from a past that no longer exists and projecting futures that may never come. Meanwhile, the only life you will ever actually live, this moment, passes unnoticed, unattended, unlived. Even spiritual seeking becomes another thought process. You think about enlightenment, compare different teachings, accumulate techniques and practices. The very desire to be free from thought becomes another thought, another layer of mental noise covering the simplicity of just being present. Sitting in meditation, you try to quiet the mind, but the effort to be quiet creates its own noise. You judge your meditation, compare it to yesterday's session, wonder if you are doing it right. The observer watching the thoughts is just another thought, and the observer watching the observer is yet another layer of the same process. But occasionally, unexpectedly, there is a gap. A moment when the commentator takes a break, when the analyzer stops analyzing, when the voice in your head simply stops. In that gap, something else appears, not your thoughts about life, but life itself, not your ideas about peace, but actual peace, not the concept of love, but love itself. These gaps come not through effort but through a kind of relaxed attention, like falling asleep except into wakefulness instead of unconsciousness. They cannot be manufactured or repeated, only noticed when they occur naturally. The gap reveals that you are not your thoughts any more than you are the weather outside your window. Thoughts arise and pass away like clouds in the sky of consciousness, but you are the sky itself, vast, unchanging, unaffected by whatever passes through it. Memory is not just what you remember. Memory is how you see. Every perception is filtered through the accumulated residue of all your previous perceptions, creating not fresh seeing but recognition. You see not what is, but what you have learned to see. Walk through your neighborhood and notice how little you actually observe. The houses, the trees, the people, they have all been filed away under familiar categories that require no fresh attention. Your mind provides a highlights reel of what it thinks you need to notice, editing out everything that does not fit its established patterns. This is conditioning, the weight of the known pressing down on every moment, preventing anything truly new from being seen. You meet a person and immediately begin the process of categorization. Young, old, attractive, threatening, similar to me, different from me. The actual person disappears behind the labels. Your childhood created the first and deepest layers of this conditioning. The way your parents looked at you taught you how to look at yourself. Their fears became your fears. Their dreams became your dreams. Their limitations became the boundaries of what you thought possible. You learned not just facts but ways of seeing, patterns of response that now feel as natural as breathing. Culture adds more layers. You learn what is beautiful and what is ugly, what is success and what is failure, what is normal and what is strange. These learnings feel like discoveries, but they are really installations, software programs, that determine how your consciousness will process reality. Watch how memory colors the present moment. You taste food and compare it to previous meals. You hear music and it reminds you of someone you once knew. You smell a particular scent and suddenly you are 7 years old again, standing in your grandmother's kitchen. The present moment becomes a portal to the past, rather than an experience in itself. Even your emotions are largely memory. You feel angry and assume it is because of what just happened, but often the anger is an old anger activated by something that reminds you of a previous hurt. You feel joy and think it is about the current situation, but often it is the echo of an earlier joy awakened by similarity. Love itself becomes distorted by memory. You love not the person in front of you, but the person they remind you of, or the person you remember them being, or the person you hope they will become. The actual human being, in all their present moment reality, remains unseen behind the veil of your projections. Fear works the same way. You are afraid, not of what is happening, but of what happened before, that this reminds you of, or what might happen that resembles something that once caused pain. The mind creates elaborate defense systems against threats that exist primarily in memory. But memory is not the enemy. It is simply misplaced. Memory serves a function when it comes to practical matters, remembering how to drive a car, recognizing faces, learning from genuine experience. The problem comes when psychological memory, the emotional residue of the past, interferes with psychological perception in the present. To see clearly, you must see with fresh eyes. This means approaching each moment as if you have never encountered anything like it before, because in truth, you have not. This sunset is not all sunsets. This person is not all people. This moment is utterly unique and will never come again. Fresh seeing requires what Krishnamurti called the beginner's mind, not the accumulation of knowledge but the emptiness that allows something new to be seen. It means being willing to not know, to give up the security of recognition for the insecurity of genuine encounter. Children naturally see this way before conditioning hardens into habit. They look at the world with wonder because they have not yet learned to take it for granted. Every butterfly is miraculous. Every mud puddle is an ocean. Every cardboard box is a spaceship. They see not objects but possibilities. To recover this quality of seeing, you must be willing to not know what you are looking at. To see your spouse as if meeting them for the first time. To taste water as if you have never tasted water before. To hear your own name as if it belongs to a stranger. The whole spiritual industry is built on becoming. Become enlightened. Become peaceful. Become loving. Become free. But what if becoming is the very thing that prevents being? What if the effort to become something other than what you are is what keeps you trapped in what you are? You set goals for your spiritual development, just like you set goals for your career or your fitness. Meditate for 20 minutes daily. Practice compassion. Cultivate mindfulness. Read sacred texts. Follow teachers. Join communities. The spiritual path becomes another project for the ego to manage, another way to feel progress toward a better version of yourself. But who is it that wants to become enlightened? The same mind that wants everything else. A bigger house, a better job, more love, greater security. The wanting mind simply changes its focus from material desires to spiritual ones, but the fundamental movement remains the same, away from what is toward what could be. Krishnamurti pointed out the absurdity of this pursuit. How can a mind that is confused become clear? How can a mind that is violent become peaceful? It is like trying to clean muddy water by stirring it. The very effort creates more disturbance. The seeker and the sought are one. The mind that seeks peace is the same mind that destroys peace through seeking. The person who wants to be free is held captive by the very wanting. The one who pursues love creates distance from love through pursuit. Watch how spiritual practice can become another form of accumulation. You collect experiences, insights, states of consciousness. You compare your progress to others, measure your advancement, compete in the subtle hierarchy of awakening. The ego finds new ways to feel special, superior, chosen. Even surrender becomes a strategy. You practice letting go, work at acceptance, try to be present, but practice surrender is still effort. And effort is the opposite of surrender. True, letting go cannot be practiced any more than falling asleep can be practiced. You can create conditions that allow it to happen, but you cannot make it happen. The idea of gradual enlightenment appeals to the mind because it suggests that spiritual development follows the same rules as learning to play piano or building a business. Practice leads to improvement, and improvement leads to mastery. But consciousness is not a skill to be developed. It is what you already are. You are not a person who sometimes experiences consciousness. You are consciousness experiencing what it is like to be a person. The wave does not need to become the ocean. Place. It already is the ocean, expressing itself as a wave. The search for your true self is like looking for your glasses while wearing them. This does not mean that practices are useless. Meditation, contemplation, study, these can create space for realization to occur. But they are more like gardening than manufacturing. You cannot force a flower to bloom, but you can create conditions that allow blooming to happen naturally. The ending of becoming is not another achievement, but the recognition that there was never anywhere to go. You are not on a journey toward awakening. You are awakening dreaming that it is on a journey toward itself. What you seek is what is seeking. The love you want to find is the love that is looking. The peace you hope to achieve is the peace that is hoping. When this is seen, directly, without the mediation of thought or belief, the search ends not in finding, but in the realization that there was never anything lost. Becoming is time, and time is becoming. Both are movements of thought, projecting a future different from the present. But reality exists only now, and now is always already complete. Nothing needs to be added to this moment for it to be whole. Nothing needs to be achieved for you to be what you already are. Then there is silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of the internal narrator. Not emptiness, but fullness, so complete that there is no space for commentary. Not peace as the opposite of disturbance, but peace as the very nature of what you are. It comes unexpectedly, uninvited, unearned. You are washing dishes, and suddenly there is only the sensation of warm water and soap bubbles, no one washing dishes. You are walking in the park, and suddenly there is only walking, no walker. you are breathing. And suddenly there is only breath, no breather. In this silence, the boundary between observer and observed dissolves. You are not looking at the sunset, you are the seeing in which the sunset appears. You are not hearing the bird song, you are the listening that receives the song. You are not thinking thoughts, you are the space in which thoughts arise and dissolve. The mind tries to capture this silence, to understand it, to repeat it. But any movement toward it takes you away from it. It cannot be grasped, because there is no one to grasp, and nothing to be grasped. It cannot be remembered because it exists outside of time. It cannot be described because it is prior to language. This silence is not something you enter, it is what you discover you have never left. It is not a state to be achieved, but the substratum of all states. Thoughts come and go in it, emotions arise and pass away in it, experiences flow through it, but it remains unchanging, untouched, undisturbed. You recognize this silence as your deepest nature. Not the person you think you are with its history and problems and desires, but the consciousness in which the person appears. Not the wave with its particular shape and movement, but the ocean that is waving. In this recognition, fear dissolves. What is there to be afraid of when you realize you are the very thing that is experiencing the fear? What is there to protect when you see that you are the space in which all things arise and pass away? What is there to lose when you discover you are that which cannot be gained or lost? Love is no longer something you feel, but something you are. Not the emotional love that depends on objects and conditions, but the love that is the very nature of consciousness, recognizing itself in all its expressions. This love needs no reason, seeks no response, asks nothing in return. Problems do not disappear in this silence, but they are seen differently. They are like weather patterns in the sky of awareness, temporary disturbances that do not touch the sky itself. You respond to them with clarity rather than reactivity, wisdom rather than fear. The person you thought you were does not vanish, but is seen in its proper context, a temporary expression of something much vaster, like a character in a dream recognizing itself as the dreamer. The story continues, but you are no longer trapped in identifying with just one character. This silence speaks, not in words but in direct knowing. It teaches not through concepts but through its own presence. In its embrace, all seeking stops, all questions resolve, all suffering ends, not because anything has been eliminated but because what you are is recognized as untouched by what seems to happen to you. The world remains exactly as it was, but you are no longer the same one looking at it, and in that shift of the seer, everything is seen anew. There is someone watching, always watching. Behind your eyes, behind your thoughts, behind every experience, there sits an observer, taking notes, making judgments, keeping score. This watcher feels separate from what it watches, superior to what it observes, in control of what it perceives. You know this observer intimately. It is the voice that says, "I am angry," rather than simply being anger. It is the one that says, "I am thinking," rather than just thinking. It is the commentator that never stops commenting, the analyzer that turns every moment into an object to be examined. This observer creates the fundamental division that splits your world in two, the watcher and the watched, the thinker and the thought, the experiencer and the experience. On one side stands the I, seemingly solid, continuous, in charge. On the other side lies everything else, the world, emotions, sensations, other people, all reduced to objects for the observer's consideration. Watch how this division operates throughout your day. You feel sad, but there is immediately someone there noticing the sadness, evaluating it, trying to understand its cause or eliminate its presence. You are not simply sad, you become someone who has sadness, someone who is experiencing sadness, someone who can step back and observe their own emotional state. This seems natural, even beneficial. After all, isn't self-awareness good? Isn't it valuable to be able to observe your own thoughts and feelings? But look more closely at what this division actually creates. The observer always feels separate from what it observes, creating a fundamental loneliness even in the midst of experience. When you are joyful, the observer analyzes the joy, compares it to previous joys, worries about how long it will last. The joy itself becomes secondary to the one who is having the joy. The immediate experience is filtered through the lens of the one who watches, diminishing its directness, its immediacy, its reality. The observer claims to be objective, but it is perhaps the most subjective element of all. It sees everything through the filter of past experience, projecting meaning and significance based on memory and conditioning. It pretends to be a neutral witness, while actually being the most biased participant in every moment. This watcher has a name for itself: me. It tells a story about itself, maintains identity, defends its territory. It says, my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences, creating ownership over things that arise and pass away without permission. It turns the flowing process of life into a collection of possessions belonging to someone. But who is this observer? When you try to look at the one who is looking, what do you find? You can observe thoughts, but can you observe the thinker? You can watch emotions arise and pass away, but can you catch sight of the one who watches? You can see the content of consciousness, but can you see consciousness itself? The search for the observer leads to a strange discovery. The harder you look for the one who is looking, the more elusive it becomes. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror, or like trying to bite your own teeth. The observer, when sought directly, disappears into the very act of observing. What you thought was the observer turns out to be just another thought, another mental movement, another arising in the field of awareness. The I that seemed so solid and permanent reveals itself to be as ephemeral as the thoughts and feelings it claimed to observe. The watcher is just another thing being watched. This creates a vertigo of infinite regress. If the observer is observed, then who is observing the observer? And who observes the observer of the observer? The mind tries to solve this puzzle by creating layers of watchers, but each new level of observation simply creates another level to be observed. The division between observer and observed begins to reveal itself as a mental construction, a trick of thought that creates the illusion of separation where none actually exists. The boundary between watcher and watched starts to blur, exposing the artificial nature of this fundamental duality that seemed so obvious and necessary. In this recognition, something shifts. The solid ground of the separate self begins to feel less solid. The clear division between inside and outside, between self and world, starts to waver. What seemed like the most basic fact of existence, that there is someone here having experiences, begins to appear questionable. This questioning is not comfortable. The entire structure of personal identity depends on the reality of the observer. If there is no solid self watching life unfold, then who are you? If the observer is just another movement in consciousness rather than consciousness itself, then what is the basis of your existence? The mind rebels against this inquiry. It quickly reasserts the reality of the observer, finds new ways to prove its existence, creates more subtle forms of the watcher to maintain the division. But once the question has been asked, authentically, it cannot be completely suppressed. The crack in the foundation of selfhood, once opened, continues to widen. The truth is dangerous. Not because it is harmful, but because it threatens everything you think you know about yourself. It approaches like a revolution that promises to overthrow the entire government of your inner world, and every defense mechanism you possess mobilizes to prevent this uprising. You have spent your entire life building a sense of who you are, your personality, your beliefs, your memories, your relationships, your achievements, your failures. This construction feels precious because it feels like you. To question its reality feels like questioning your own existence, and every cell in your psychological body recoils from this threat. So you develop sophisticated ways of avoiding truth while appearing to seek it. You read spiritual books, but don't let them penetrate too deeply. You attend workshops and seminars, but maintain a safe distance from any teaching that might actually transform you. You practice meditation, but use it to improve your sense of self, rather than to question whether that self really exists. The fear manifests in countless subtle ways. You find reasons to dismiss insights that feel too threatening. You rationalize experiences that don't fit your worldview. You surround yourself with people who reflect your own level of understanding back to you, creating an echo chamber that feels like validation but is actually avoidance. When truth does break through despite your defenses, you quickly work to contain it. You turn insights into concepts, experiences into memories, revelations into beliefs. You domesticate the wild truth, making it safe and manageable, and ultimately powerless to change anything fundamental. You say you want to grow, but growth means letting go of who you were. You say you want to be free, but freedom means releasing the prison you have learned to call home. You say you want to love, but love means the dissolution of the boundaries that separate you from others. These desires are real, but so is the terror of what their fulfillment would mean. The ego has many tricks for maintaining its territory while appearing to be spiritual. It becomes the seeker, making the search for truth another identity to defend. It collects experiences and insights like trophies, using spiritual attainments to feel special, rather than allowing them to dissolve the one who feels special. It creates hierarchies in the spiritual world, just as it does in the material world. It judges others as less evolved, less aware, less enlightened. It finds teachers who make it feel advanced, rather than those who would expose its fundamental illusions. It uses the very teachings meant to free it as new chains to bind itself. Perhaps most cleverly, the ego appropriates the language of egolessness. It talks about surrender while strengthening its grip. It speaks of letting go while holding on more tightly. It uses concepts like no self to create a new, more sophisticated sense of self, the one who understands no self. Watch how this operates in your own consciousness. Notice how you can read about the illusory nature of the ego, while the ego that is reading feels confirmed in its spiritual understanding. Observe how you can have insights about the need to let go, while the one having insights feels more solid and real than before. The fear runs deeper than the loss of identity. It touches the terror of meaninglessness, of chaos, of a universe without the familiar reference point of a central self to organize experience around. If there is no me at the center of your world, then what holds it all together? If there is no solid self-making choices, then what guides your actions? If there is no permanent identity, then what survives death? These fears are not irrational. They point to the magnitude of what is actually being asked of you. The truth does mean the end of the world as you have known it. It does mean the dissolution of everything you have used to define yourself. It does mean stepping into an unknown that the mind cannot map or control. But the fear also reveals something important. There is something in you that is not afraid. There is awareness of the fear without being consumed by it. There is an intelligence that can recognize the ego's defenses without being trapped by them. There is a clarity that sees through the smoke screens even as they are being deployed. This fearless awareness is what you actually are, beneath all the layers of protective conditioning. It is what seeks truth despite the ego's resistance. It is what recognizes falseness even when falseness feels comfortable. It is what continues to question even when questioning threatens everything familiar. The fear of truth is the last guardian at the gate of freedom. It is the final test that determines whether you are serious about awakening or simply want to improve your dream. To face this fear directly, without trying to overcome it or escape from it, is to discover that what you truly are was never in any danger from any truth. You sit in meditation trying to be aware. You make an effort to watch your breath, to observe your thoughts, to cultivate mindfulness. But who is making this effort? Who is trying to be aware? The very attempt to control awareness reveals the persistence of the one who wants to control. The will enters even into the most spiritual activities. You try to be present, which immediately creates someone who is trying, and a state of presence to be achieved. You attempt to let go, which establishes a gripper and something to be released. You work at surrender, which maintains a worker and a goal to be accomplished. This creates an exhausting paradox. The more effort you make to be aware, the more you strengthen the sense of someone who needs to make effort. The harder you try to be present, the more you reinforce the one who is absent. The more you practice letting go, the more solid becomes the one who is holding on. Awareness is not something you can do, it is what you are. But the mind insists on turning it into an activity, a practice, a skill to be developed. It wants to add awareness to its collection of abilities, to improve its capacity for consciousness, to become more aware. Watch this movement carefully. Notice how even the reading of these words is accompanied by someone who is trying to understand, someone who wants to get it right, someone who hopes to achieve some kind of realization. The very effort to understand prevents understanding. The grasping for insight pushes insight away. Control is the ego's fundamental strategy for survival. It believes that by managing experience, directing attention, and influencing outcomes, it can maintain its position as the central authority in your inner world. But consciousness cannot be controlled any more than you can control the weather or the movements of the stars. You cannot make yourself love someone, though you can pretend to love them. You cannot force yourself to be peaceful, though you can create conditions that allow peace to arise naturally. You cannot will yourself to be present, though you can stop doing the things that take you away from presence. True awareness arises spontaneously when the effort to be aware ceases. It appears not as the result of practice, but in the gaps between practices, not as an achievement of the will, but in the relaxation of willing. It comes not to the one who seeks it, but in the absence of the seeker. This is perhaps the most frustrating thing the spiritual ego encounters. All its strategies for self-improvement, all its techniques for advancement, all its methods for getting somewhere, none of them work for the only thing that really matters. In fact, they often create more distance from what is sought. The trying mind wants to know how to stop trying. It wants a method for being methodless, a technique for being technique-free, a practice for ending practice. But this very wanting is what maintains the distance from what is already here, already present, already aware. Yet there is something you can do, or rather, something you can stop doing. You can cease the constant effort to manage your inner experience. You can stop trying to think the right thoughts, feel the right feelings, have the right insights. You can give up the exhausting project of improving yourself spiritually. This is not passive resignation, but active relaxation. It is not giving up, but letting go of what was never working anyway. It is not defeat, but the recognition that what you were fighting for was already yours, and what you were fighting against was only a shadow. When the will relaxes its grip on awareness, something extraordinary is revealed. Consciousness is not something you possess, but something that possesses you. Awareness is not your capacity, but the field in which you can appear. Presence is not your achievement, but your very nature. The controller and the controlled are seen to be one movement, like two sides of the same coin. The observer and the observed collapse into pure observing. The meditator and the meditation dissolve into undivided awareness. What seemed like a relationship between separate elements reveals itself as a single, seamless process. In this recognition, effort becomes effortless. Action arises spontaneously without someone deciding to act. Responses emerge naturally without someone choosing to respond. Life lives itself through you without you needing to manage the process. The will does not disappear but finds its proper place. Instead of trying to control consciousness, it serves consciousness. Instead of directing awareness, it removes the obstacles to natural awareness. Instead of creating presence, it stops creating absence. This is the ultimate surrender. Not the giving up of your power, but the recognition that your real power was never what you thought it was. True power lies not in controlling life, but in allowing life to live through you without resistance, without interference, without the constant commentary of the one who thinks it knows better than life itself how life should be lived. The revelation comes not as a thought but as a seeing, sudden and complete as lightning illuminating a landscape in the darkness. In that flash of insight, the entire structure of separation collapses, and what seemed like the most fundamental fact of existence, the division between observer and observed, is revealed as an optical illusion of consciousness. You are looking at a tree, but suddenly there is no you looking at a tree. There is only looking, only tree, only the single movement of seeing, in which both seer and seen arise simultaneously. The boundary between inside and outside simply disappears, revealing that it was never really there except as a construction of thought. The feeling is both shocking and familiar, like remembering something you never knew you had forgotten. Of course, this is how it is. how it has always been. The separation was only apparent, only a way consciousness has of experiencing itself as if it were divided when, in reality, no division is possible. You realize that you have never actually been separate from anything you have ever observed. Every sunset you have watched, you were. Every face you have seen, you are. Every sound you have heard exists only in the listening that you are. There is no distance between awareness and its contents, because awareness is its contents. The observer and the observed are like the front and back of a single sheet of paper, and they appear to be different, but cannot actually be separated. Cut the paper in half, and each piece still has a front and a back. The duality is conceptual, not actual. This seeing is not an experience that someone has, but the recognition of what is always already the case. It is not a special state, comes and goes, but the revelation of the ordinary nature of every moment. It is not an achievement of consciousness, but consciousness recognizing its own nature. The aha comes with the realization that you have been looking for something you never lost. You have been seeking a state you never left. You have been trying to become what you have never stopped being. The search for unity was taking place within unity. The quest for wholeness was happening as wholeness. Every effort to bridge the gap between observer and observed was based on the illusion that there was a gap to bridge. Every technique for achieving oneness was missing the oneness in which the technique was occurring. Every method for reaching enlightenment was already happening in the enlightenment that makes method possible. In this moment of seeing, questions that seemed so important simply evaporate. How can there be a problem of achieving enlightenment when enlightenment is what is trying to achieve enlightenment? How can there be a path to truth when truth is what is walking the path? How can there be a journey to awakening when awakening is what is journeying? The cosmic joke becomes apparent. The wave has been desperately trying to find the ocean while being ocean all along. The dream character has been searching for the dreamer while being the dreamer dreaming of being a character. Consciousness has been seeking consciousness through consciousness while never being anything other than consciousness. Laughter arises, not the laughter of humor but the laughter of recognition, the laughter of relief, the laughter of coming home to what you never left. The whole spiritual search reveals itself as an elaborate game consciousness plays with itself. Hide and seek, played so convincingly that the seeker forgets they are also the sought. But even as this seeing occurs, there is no one having the seeing. The experience belongs to no one, because there is no one separate from the experience to own it. The insight arises in emptiness and dissolves back into emptiness, leaving no trace, requiring no maintenance, demanding no understanding. This is not a mystical experience, but the most ordinary thing imaginable, reality being reality, consciousness being conscious, what is being, what is. It is only extraordinary from the perspective of the illusion of separation. From the perspective of wholeness, it is as natural as breathing. The moment passes, but what has been seen cannot be unseen. The recognition of non-duality does not need to be maintained because it never depends on any particular state or experience. It is the context in which all states and experiences arise, including the state of forgetting, the experience of separation, the feeling of being a someone looking at something. The center cannot hold because there never was a center. What you have taken to be the core of your identity, the thinker of thoughts, the experiencer of experiences, the one who sits behind eyes observing life, begins to reveal itself as empty space, as pure fiction, as a grammatical necessity mistaken for psychological reality. You have always assumed that thoughts require a thinker, just as you assume that walking requires a walker, or that rain requires a rainer. But look directly. Can you find the thinker apart from thinking? Can you locate the experiencer separate from experiencing? Can you discover the observer independent of observing? The search for the self that you have taken to be most obviously real leads to the most surprising discovery. It isn't there. Not that it has disappeared or been destroyed, but that it was never there in the first place. What you thought was the most solid thing about you turns out to be the most empty. Language creates the illusion by requiring a subject for every verb. I think seems to necessitate someone who thinks. I feel appears to require someone who feels. But this is a limitation of language, not a description of reality. Thinking happens feeling occurs, but there is no separate entity doing the thinking or feeling. It is like saying, "It is raining." What is the "it" that rains? There is no entity separate from the raining that does the raining. There is only raining happening. Similarly, there is no entity separate from thinking that does the thinking. There is only thinking occurring. The dissolution of the center is terrifying to the mind, because the mind is precisely this center, this reference point, this organizing principle around which all experience seems to revolve. If there is no center, then what organizes experience? If there is no self, then what makes choices? If there is no identity, then what maintains continuity? But watch what actually happens when the center dissolves. Experience continues, but without a central experiencer. Thoughts arise, but without a thinker. Choices are made, but without a chooser. Life flows perfectly well without the manager that thought it was essential for life's functioning. What you discover is that the center was not the source of order but the source of disorder. The attempts to control and organize and manage experience from a central command were actually creating conflict and confusion. When the controller disappears, natural order emerges spontaneously. Without someone trying to orchestrate your responses, appropriate responses arise naturally. Without someone attempting to choose the right choice, right action happens by itself. Without someone working to be loving or wise or peaceful, love and wisdom and peace express themselves effortlessly. The absence of the center does not create chaos but reveals the inherent intelligence of the whole. What you thought required your personal management turns out to manage itself far more efficiently without your interference. The body breathes without your direction, the heart beats without your control, and consciousness knows without your instruction. This is not the elimination of individuality, but the discovery of what individuality actually is. You are not a separate entity having experiences, but a unique expression of the whole experiencing itself. You are not a wave separate from the ocean, but a particular way the ocean has of moving. Your personality, your memories, your preferences, these continue to function as they always have, but they are no longer centered around a solid self. They are like patterns in consciousness, temporary formations in the field of awareness, expressions of the infinite expressing itself finitely. The fear that dissolving the center means becoming a zombie or losing all motivation proves unfounded. Instead, action becomes more spontaneous, creativity flows more freely, and responses arise more appropriately. Without the resistance of a separate self, life moves through you with less friction and more grace. What remains when the center collapses is not nothing but everything, not emptiness as a void, but emptiness as fullness without boundaries. Not the absence of self, but the presence of the self that includes all apparent selves. Not personal annihilation, but the recognition that what you truly are was never personal to begin with. The collapse of the center is not an event that happens once, but a recognition that can deepen endlessly. Sometimes the center seems to reform, the sense of separation reasserts itself, the feeling of being someone having experiences returns. But now you know it for what it is, a temporary crystallization in the field of consciousness, no more real than a cloud in the sky of awareness. The center that cannot hold was only ever a center of holding, a contraction in consciousness that created the illusion of a separate self. When the holding relaxes, when the contraction dissolves, what is revealed is the natural expansiveness of what you have always been, consciousness itself, appearing as everything, separate from nothing, centered everywhere, and bounded nowhere. If this part got you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now. Knowledge is a beautiful prison. Its bars are made of concepts, its walls constructed from conclusions, its roof formed by the certainty that you understand. You have spent your life gathering information, accumulating understanding, building a mental library of explanations for how things work, why things happen, what things mean. This collection feels like wealth, like security, like progress. But look more closely at what knowledge actually does to your capacity to see. You encounter a sunset and immediately know what it is: the earth rotating away from the sun, light refracting through atmospheric particles, wavelengths shifting toward the red end of the spectrum. The knowledge is accurate, useful, scientifically sound. But in the moment of knowing, the actual sunset disappears behind the explanation. You see not the breathtaking display of color and light before you, but the familiar category, sunset, with all its associated information. This is how knowledge works. It transforms the unknown into the known, the mysterious into the explained, the immediate into the conceptual. What was once alive with possibility becomes fixed in understanding. What was once fresh becomes stale through familiarity. What was once a direct encounter becomes a remembered concept. The mind loves knowledge because knowledge gives the illusion of control. If you understand something, you feel you can predict it, manipulate it, use it for your purposes. Knowledge makes the vast, chaotic, unpredictable universe feel manageable, comprehensible, safe. It is the ego's primary tool for creating the sense that it knows where it is and what it is doing. But watch what happens when you meet another person. Before they have spoken a word, knowledge begins its work of categorization. Young, old, attractive, threatening, similar to you, different from you. Their race, gender, class, nationality are assessed, filed. Their clothing, posture, expression are analyzed for clues about their character, their intentions, their worth. By the time actual interaction begins, you are no longer relating to a human being, but to a collection of categories, assumptions, and projections. The person themselves, this unique, unrepeatable expression of consciousness, has vanished behind the screen of what you think you know about them. Knowledge creates the past and projects the future, but it cannot touch the present moment. It can tell you what happened yesterday and predict what might happen tomorrow, but it is utterly helpless before what is happening now. The present is always unknown, always unprecedented, always beyond the reach of accumulated understanding. This is why the most profound experiences of your life, moments of love, beauty, wonder, insight, happen not through knowledge but through the temporary suspension of knowledge. In those moments, you don't know what you are experiencing, and that not knowing is precisely what allows the experience to be complete, immediate, transformative. The spiritual traditions have always pointed to this limitation of knowledge. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. Be still and know that I am God. The deepest wisdom has always emerged from the recognition that true understanding lies beyond the reach of the understanding mind. Krishnamurti took this insight further than perhaps anyone before him. He suggested that knowledge is not just inadequate for spiritual understanding, it is actively harmful to it. Every conclusion you reach about reality prevents you from seeing reality freshly. Every answer you accept stops you from staying open to the question. Every belief you adopt closes your mind to possibilities beyond that belief. The prison of knowledge is so familiar that you mistake it for freedom. You think that learning more, understanding better, knowing deeper will eventually lead to truth. But knowledge can only lead to more knowledge. Understanding can only produce more understanding. Truth lies in a completely different dimension, not in the accumulation of information, but in the immediate perception of what is. To see clearly, you must be willing to not know. To understand deeply, you must release the need to understand. To encounter reality, you must give up your ideas about reality. This is perhaps the most difficult thing the mind can be asked to do, to relinquish its primary source of security and identity. But this relinquishment is not a loss, it is a liberation. When you stop knowing what you are looking at, you can actually see it. When you cease understanding what you are experiencing, you can actually experience it. When you release your conclusions about reality, reality itself becomes available to direct perception. The freedom of not knowing is not ignorance but innocence. It is not the absence of intelligence, but intelligence freed from the burden of the known. It is not stupidity, but the wisdom that recognizes the limitations of accumulated wisdom. It is the mind empty enough to receive what is actually here, rather than what it expects to find. In this emptiness, everything becomes new. The familiar world reveals hidden depths. Ordinary moments become extraordinary. The people you thought you knew show you facets you had never seen. Life itself becomes fresh, immediate, unpredictable, not because it has changed, but because you have stopped filtering it through the lens of what you think you already know. Silence is not the opposite of sound. It is not the absence of noise, not the gap between words, not the space where nothing is happening. True silence is alive, pregnant with possibility, thick with presence. It is not empty but full, so full that there is no room for the chatter of the mind, no space for the commentary of thought. You have experienced this silence, though you may not have recognized it for what it was. It comes in moments when the internal narrator suddenly stops, when the constant stream of mental commentary simply ceases. Perhaps you were absorbed in a piece of music, and suddenly there was only music, no one listening. Perhaps you were watching a child at play, and suddenly there was only watching, no watcher. Perhaps you were in nature, and suddenly there was only nature naturing, no observer of nature. This silence cannot be created through effort. You cannot make your mind quiet any more than you can make yourself fall asleep. The harder you try to be silent, the more noise you create. The more you fight your thoughts, the more thoughts arise to be fought. The silence that matters arises naturally when the conditions that create mental noise are no longer present. What creates the noise? The constant effort to understand, to control, to improve, to become. The endless stream of judgments, comparisons, plans, and memories. The voice that comments on everything, evaluates everything, tries to make sense of everything. When this voice takes a break, not through suppression but through exhaustion, not through force but through natural relaxation, silence emerges. In this silence, seeing happens. Not the kind of seeing that involves the eyes, though it includes that. Not the kind of seeing that gathers information, though it may result in understanding. But the kind of seeing that is perception itself, awareness itself, consciousness knowing itself directly without the mediation of thought. This seeing is not something you do, it is what you are. You are not a person who sometimes sees clearly. You are seeing itself, temporarily identifying with the idea of being a person. When the identification relaxes, when the story of the separate self becomes quiet, what remains is pure seeing. Seeing without a seer, awareness without a center. Krishnamurti spoke of this silence with extraordinary precision. He distinguished between the silence that is imposed and the silence that arises naturally, between the quiet that comes from discipline and the stillness that emerges from understanding. True silence, he said, is not the result of practice but the flowering of intelligence, not the achievement of will, but the gift of love. This silence has a quality that the thinking mind cannot comprehend. It is simultaneously empty and full, still and dynamic, peaceful and intensely alive. It contains all possibilities, while being attached to none. It is the source from which all experience arises, and the space into which all experience dissolves. In this silence, problems do not get solved. They are seen to be non-problems. Questions do not get answered. They are seen to be inappropriate questions. Conflicts do not get resolved. They are seen to be based on false premises. The very framework that creates psychological suffering is revealed to be made of thought, and when thought becomes quiet, the framework dissolves. But this is not escape from reality. It is the most intimate contact with reality possible. When the mind stops overlaying its interpretations, judgments, and projections onto what is happening, what is actually happening can be perceived directly. When the commentary stops, the symphony can be heard clearly for the first time. This silence speaks, not in words but in immediate knowing, not through concepts but through direct transmission. Not by telling you about truth but by being truth itself, present and available in every moment when the mind is quiet enough to receive it. You cannot preserve this silence or bottle it for later use. You cannot practice it or perfect it or make it into a technique. It comes when it comes and goes when it goes, like weather in the sky of consciousness. Your role is not to create it but to recognize it when it arises, not to maintain it but to be available to it, not to understand it but to be it. The silence that is seeing transforms everything it touches, not by changing things but by revealing what they actually are beneath the overlay of mental interpretation. In this silence, the ordinary becomes sacred, the familiar becomes mysterious, the known becomes unknowable once again. From this silence, action arises that is not contaminated by the agenda of the separate self. Responses emerge that are appropriate to what is actually happening, rather than what you think is happening. Love flows that is not based on personal preference, but on the recognition of what is eternally present in all apparent forms. This is meditation without method, prayer without words, worship without object. This is consciousness resting in its own nature, awareness aware of itself, simply being what it has always been beneath all the noise of becoming. Every meditation technique is a bridge to the place where no technique is needed. Every practice is a pointer to the state where practice becomes irrelevant. Every method is a finger pointing to the moon of natural awareness. But when you see the moon directly, you no longer need the finger. You have probably tried many approaches to meditation. Watching the breath, repeating mantras, visualizing images, concentrating on objects, cultivating states. Some may have brought temporary peace, moments of clarity, glimpses of something beyond the ordinary mental chatter. But notice what all these techniques have in common. They require effort. They involve doing something. They are based on the assumption that awareness is something you can improve or achieve. But what if awareness is not something you can do but something you already are? What if consciousness is not a capacity you can develop, but the very medium in which all development takes place? What if the peace you seek through practice is the peace in which the seeking is already occurring? Traditional meditation often becomes another activity for the ego to master, another skill to develop, another way to feel progress toward a goal. You compare today's session to yesterday's, judge your ability to concentrate, work to achieve better states. The very effort to meditate creates a meditator, and the meditator becomes another identity to maintain and improve. But who is it that meditates? Who watches the breath, repeats the mantra, visualizes the image? Is this meditator separate from what is being observed? Can you find the one who is making the effort apart from the effort itself? The search for the meditator leads to the same discovery as the search for any separate self. There is no one there. What remains when the meditator disappears? Pure meditation, not as an activity, but as the natural state of consciousness, when it is not being directed, manipulated, or improved. Not as something you do, but as what you are when you stop doing. Not as a practice, but as the ground in which all practice occurs. This natural meditation happens constantly without your involvement. Right now, as you hear these words, awareness is naturally aware. As thoughts arise and pass away, consciousness is naturally conscious of them. As sensations appear and dissolve, presence is naturally present to them. No effort is required for this natural knowing. It is simply what awareness does, like wetness is what water does. The invitation is not to meditate, but to notice that meditation is already happening. Not to become aware, but to recognize that awareness is already present. Not to achieve a special state, but to see that this ordinary moment is already extraordinary when met with simple attention. This does not mean that formal practice is useless. Sitting quietly, watching the breath, following established methods, can create conditions that make this recognition more likely. They can help settle the mind, develop concentration, cultivate beneficial states, but they are means, not ends. Boats to cross the river, not the shore itself. The danger comes when the means becomes confused with the end, when the boat becomes more important than the destination. You can become so focused on perfecting your technique that you miss what the technique was designed to reveal. You can become so attached to your practice that it becomes another form of bondage rather than a gateway to freedom. Effortless awareness is not lazy or passive. It is intensely alive, brilliantly alert, vibrantly present. But this aliveness is not manufactured through effort. It is the natural radiance of consciousness when it is not being constrained by the attempt to direct it somewhere other than where it already is. In this natural meditation, there is no object of meditation because there is no meditator separate from what is being experienced. There is no technique because consciousness needs no instruction in how to be conscious. There is no goal because awareness is already complete, already perfect, already everything it could ever become. This is not a new method to add to your collection, but the recognition that makes all methods obsolete. Not a better way to meditate, but the seeing that what you sought through meditation was never absent. Not an achievement of consciousness, but consciousness recognizing its own nature. When this recognition dawns, meditation becomes as natural as breathing. It is not something you do at certain times in certain places, but the constant background of all experience. Whether you are sitting in silence or engaged in activity, whether you are alone or with others, whether you are happy or sad, the awareness in which all of this appears remains unchanged, untouched, eternally present. This is meditation without method, the ending of the effort to be something other than what you already are, the cessation of the struggle to achieve a state different from what is already present, the recognition that what you sought was seeking itself all along. There is only now. Not now as opposed to then, not the present as different from the past and future, but now as the eternal context in which all apparent time appears. Now is not a moment in time, but the timeless space in which all moments arise and dissolve. It is not a duration, however brief, but the undivided wholeness that makes duration possible. You live in this eternal now, have always lived in it, could never leave it even if you tried. Every memory you have ever recalled was recalled now. Every plan you have ever made was made now. Every moment you have ever experienced was experienced now. There has never been a time when it was not now, and there never will be. But the mind creates the illusion of living in time by constantly referencing what was and projecting what might be. It turns the timeless now into a thin slice between a heavy past and an uncertain future. It makes the present moment feel inadequate, always needing to be improved by achieving a better future or corrected by fixing the past. Watch how this works in your daily experience. You eat breakfast while thinking about the day ahead. You work while remembering yesterday's problems. You go to sleep while reviewing what happened and planning what needs to happen tomorrow. The actual moments of your life, eating, working, sleeping, become merely the stage for mental time travel. This constant movement away from the present creates a fundamental anxiety. You feel like you are always running late, always behind, always trying to catch up to a life that is somehow happening elsewhere. But life is only ever happening here, now, in this immediate moment, that thinking constantly overlooks in its rush toward past and future. The present moment is not an object you can focus on or a state you can achieve. It is not something small and fleeting that requires your attention to capture it. The present moment is vast, limitless, eternal. It contains all of time within itself, while being touched by none of it. It is the space in which your entire life unfolds, the context that makes all experience possible. True attention is not concentration on an object but the natural openness of awareness to what is. It is not a focusing of the mind, but the relaxation of the mind's tendency to focus elsewhere. It is not something you do, but something you are when you stop doing anything else with your awareness. This attention has no agenda, no goal, no preference for what appears within it. It receives thoughts without chasing them, emotions without resisting them, sensations without grasping them. It is like space itself, completely open, totally accepting, infinitely accommodating, yet never touched or changed by anything that passes through it. In this quality of attention, time stops. Not because the clock stops ticking, but because the psychological movement away from the present ceases. Past and future are seen to be mental constructions with no reality outside of thought. What remains is the immediacy of pure presence, the intimacy of direct experience, the completeness of what is actually here. This timeless now is not a mystical state, but the most ordinary thing imaginable. It is how every moment actually is, when you are not making it into something else through thinking about it. The extraordinariness comes not from the moment being special but from your recognition of the specialness that is always already present. Children naturally live in this timeless present until they are taught to live in psychological time. They can play for hours without awareness of time passing because they are completely absorbed in what they are doing. They have not yet learned to divide their attention between experience and thoughts about experience. The return to this natural state is not a regression but a maturation. It is the recovery of innocence through understanding, the return to simplicity through complexity, the rediscovery of the obvious through the investigation of the obscure. It is consciousness coming home to itself after its long journey through the illusions of time. In the living present, action arises spontaneously without the delay of decision-making. Response happens immediately without the interference of calculation. Intelligence operates directly, without the mediation of knowledge. This is not impulsiveness, but the natural flow of life when it is not obstructed by the time-bound thinking process. Here, in this eternal now, you discover that you have never actually lived anywhere else. Every moment of your past was present when it was experienced. Every moment of your future will be present when it arrives. The present is not just where life happens, it is the only place life can happen, the only time life can be lived, the only space life can be known. This is the living present, not a moment to be grasped, but the eternal space to be recognized, not a state to be achieved, but the natural condition to be acknowledged, not a goal to be reached, but the starting point that was never left, the destination that was never separate from the journey, the home that was never abandoned. Love is not an emotion you feel, but the very nature of seeing itself. When perception is free from the distortions of self-interest, free from the filters of conditioning, free from the agenda of the separate self, what remains is love looking through your eyes at its own infinite expression. You have known this love, though you may not have recognized it as love. It comes in moments of wonder, when the beauty of something takes your breath away, and there is no you having the experience, only the experience itself. It arises when you look at a sleeping child, and something in you melts that is deeper than emotion, wider than feeling, more intimate than affection. This love asks nothing and gives everything. It has no object because it sees no separation between lover and beloved. It needs no reason because it is reason itself, the fundamental intelligence that recognizes unity beneath apparent diversity, connection beneath apparent separation, wholeness beneath apparent fragmentation. Ordinary love is always conditional. I love you because you are beautiful, because you make me happy, because you fulfill my needs, because you share my interests. This love depends on qualities, circumstances, behaviors. When these change, the love wavers. It is really a form of sophisticated selfishness, loving what serves the self, what enhances the self, what confirms the self. But the love that is seeing has no conditions because it sees no other. It does not love the other because the other is good or beautiful or useful, but because the other is the self appearing as other. It is love recognizing itself in every form, consciousness greeting itself in every face, being celebrating itself in every expression. This love transforms perception completely. Where once you saw strangers, you now see yourself in costume. Where once you saw enemies, you now see yourself playing the role of opposition. Where once you saw others to be judged or feared or desired, you now see consciousness exploring infinite possibilities of self-expression. The shift is not emotional but perceptual. You do not become more loving in the sense of generating warmer feelings toward others. Rather, the lens through which you see is cleaned of the distortions that created the appearance of separation in the first place. When the lens is clear, love is simply what is seen because love is what is. This is why Krishnamurti insisted that love is not the opposite of hate. Hate is a corruption of love, a love that has become twisted by the belief in separation. But love itself is prior to all opposites, prior to all emotions, prior to all personal preferences. It is the very ground of perception, the essence of awareness, the nature of what you are. In this love, the observer and the observed are one. There is no lover separate from the beloved, no seer separate from the seen, no one having loving feelings toward someone else. There is only loving happening, only consciousness recognizing itself, only the one appearing as two and knowing itself to be one. This unity does not eliminate individual expressions or personal preferences. You still enjoy some people's company more than others, still feel drawn to some and not to others, still have natural affinities and attractions. But these personal movements happen within the larger recognition that all persons are expressions of the same source. All preferences are movements of the same consciousness. Compassion arises naturally from this seeing, not as an effort to help others but as the spontaneous response to recognizing yourself in everyone you meet. How can you not respond to your own suffering when you see it in another form? How can you not celebrate your own joy when you see it expressed through another face? This compassion is not sentimental or emotional. It is intelligent, discerning, appropriate. It responds to what is actually needed rather than what you think should be needed. It gives what serves rather than what makes you feel good about giving. It acts from clarity rather than confusion, from wholeness rather than the desire to feel whole. The boundaries between self and other begin to blur, not in a psychological merger, but in a recognition of what was always true. You care for the world as you care for your own body, not because you should, but because you naturally do. The health of the whole becomes as important as your personal well-being because you realize they are not different things. This is love as revolution, as transformation, as the fundamental shift in perception that changes everything while changing nothing. The world remains exactly as it was, but the one seeing the world is no longer the same. And in that shift of the seer, the world is reborn, refreshed, recognized for the first time as the perfect expression of love itself, appearing as everything you have ever seen, everything you have ever been, everything you will ever encounter. Love is seeing, and seeing is love. They are not two activities but one movement of consciousness, knowing itself as all that appears within its own infinite embrace. Everything ends. Every breath you take will end. Every thought that arises will dissolve. Every emotion that flows through you will pass away. Every relationship will conclude. Every body will return to dust. Every civilization will crumble. Every star will burn out. Every universe will expand into cold darkness. This is not pessimism, but the most fundamental fact of existence. All forms are temporary. All expressions are fleeting. All manifestations are provisional. Most people live in denial of this reality, creating elaborate strategies to avoid confronting the universality of ending. You accumulate possessions as if they were permanent, build relationships as if they were eternal, pursue goals as if achievement were lasting. The entire structure of human civilization is built on the collective agreement to pretend that what is temporary might somehow be made permanent. But what if endings are not the enemy of life, but the very thing that makes life possible? What if the beauty you perceive in a sunset comes precisely from its transience? What if the preciousness you feel in moments of love arises from their fleeting nature? What if the intensity of experience depends on its impermanence? Watch how resistance to endings creates suffering. You cling to youth as the body ages. You grasp at relationships as they change. You hold on to identities as life transforms you. You try to preserve experiences as they slip into memory. The suffering comes not from the endings themselves but from the futile attempt to prevent what cannot be prevented. Death is the ultimate ending, the one that makes all other endings possible. Yet it is death that gives urgency to choice, meaning to time, weight to action. Without death, nothing would matter because everything could be postponed indefinitely. It is the finite nature of life that creates the possibility of significance, the temporary nature of experience that generates its intensity. But endings are also beginnings. Every breath that ends allows the next breath to begin. Every thought that dissolves creates space for fresh thinking. Every relationship that concludes opens the possibility for new connection. Every death makes room for new life. Ending and beginning are not opposite processes but aspects of the same movement, the constant renewal that is the essence of existence. To see ending clearly is to see it without the filter of fear, without the distortion of resistance, without the projection of personal meaning onto an impersonal process. A leaf falls from a tree without tragedy, without story, without commentary. It simply falls, completing its brief expression of life and returning to the source from which it arose. This same clarity can be brought to human endings. Aging happens without requiring your approval. Relationships change without needing your permission. Loss occurs without consulting your preferences. When these processes are seen clearly, without the overlay of personal resistance, they reveal their inherent beauty, their natural perfection, their absolute appropriateness. The resistance to ending is the resistance to life itself, because life is a constant process of dying and being reborn. Every moment you cling to is already gone. Every experience you try to hold has already passed. Every version of yourself you attempt to preserve has already been replaced by a newer version. You are dying and being born in every instant, ending and beginning with each breath. This recognition brings a profound relief. You can stop the exhausting effort to make the temporary permanent, to make the changing unchanging, to make the mortal immortal. You can relax into the natural flow of arising and passing away, of coming and going, of beginning and ending. You can participate in the dance of impermanence rather than fighting against its rhythm. In this relaxation, a deeper continuity is revealed. What you are beneath all the changes, beyond all the endings, prior to all the beginnings, is untouched by the process of transformation. You are not the wave that rises and falls, but the ocean that remains constant through all movements. You are not the forms that appear and disappear, but the space in which all appearances arise. The beauty of ending is the beauty of completion, of fulfillment, of natural order expressing itself without interference. Every ending is perfect in its timing, appropriate in its occurrence, beautiful in its inevitability. To see this beauty is to be free from the fear that keeps you from living fully, loving deeply, being completely present to what is actually here. Death becomes not the opposite of life, but its ultimate affirmation, not the negation of being, but the completion of becoming. When this is seen clearly, without the distortion of personal fear, death reveals itself as the final gift, the ending that allows the eternal to be recognized, the conclusion that points to what never concludes, the ultimate completion that reveals the incompleteness was only apparent. Chaos is the natural state of things when left to themselves. Water finds its level. Entropy increases, systems decay, order dissolves back into randomness. The human mind rebels against this fundamental tendency, trying to impose organization, create structure, maintain control. But what if true order comes not from imposing control over chaos, but from understanding chaos so completely that order arises naturally? You can observe this principle in your own body. You do not consciously direct your heartbeat, manage your breathing, coordinate your digestion, or organize your cellular repair. These incredibly complex processes happen with perfect precision, without any intervention from your conscious will. The order that maintains your physical existence arises spontaneously from the intelligence inherent in life itself. Yet, in your psychological life, you constantly try to manage and control. You attempt to organize your thoughts, direct your emotions, plan your responses, and create order through effort. This creates not harmony but conflict, not peace but tension, not natural order but artificial rigidity that requires constant maintenance. True order is organic, flexible, responsive. It adapts to circumstances without losing its essential pattern. It maintains balance not through rigid control but through dynamic responsiveness. Like a tree that bends with the wind without breaking, like water that flows around obstacles without losing its direction, like birds that fly in formation without a commander. Watch how this natural order operates in moments of emergency. When crisis arises, the thinking mind often freezes, overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. But something deeper takes over, an intelligence that responds instantly, appropriately, perfectly to what the moment requires. This intelligence does not plan or calculate. It simply acts from a direct perception of what is needed. This same intelligence operates constantly in every aspect of life, but it is usually obscured by the mind's attempts to be in charge. When you stop trying to control outcomes and start responding to what is actually happening, this natural intelligence emerges. Action becomes effortless, responses become appropriate, and order arises without effort. The chaos that you fear is often just life trying to reorganize itself into a more appropriate pattern. What looks like disorder from your limited perspective may be the emergence of a higher order that you cannot yet perceive. The breakdown of old structures may be necessary for the breakthrough of new possibilities. Krishnamurti often spoke of the brain creating its own order when it is not being forced into patterns by conditioning, belief, or ideology. This order is not imposed from outside, but emerges from the nature of intelligence itself. It is the order of insight, of understanding, of clarity, not the order of discipline, control, or management. This natural order extends to relationships, work, creativity, and every aspect of human life. When you stop trying to force outcomes and start responding intelligently to what presents itself, life begins to flow with a grace and efficiency that no amount of planning could achieve. Opportunities arise naturally, resources appear when needed, solutions emerge spontaneously. But this requires a fundamental trust in life itself, trust that existence knows what it is doing even when you do not understand its methods. It requires letting go of the need to be in charge, the compulsion to understand everything, the desire to control outcomes. It means cooperating with life rather than trying to direct it. The order that emerges from this cooperation is alive, creative, unpredictable. It responds to the needs of each moment rather than following predetermined patterns. It creates beauty not through design but through the natural unfolding of intelligence, freed from interference. It solves problems not through analysis but through the spontaneous arising of insight. This is not passivity, but the highest form of activity, action that arises from understanding rather than effort, responses that emerge from clarity rather than confusion, order that flowers from the natural intelligence of consciousness itself. It is not the absence of order, but order freed from the limitations of personal control. In this natural order, your role shifts from controller to participant, from manager to collaborator, from director to dancer, in the cosmic dance that is always already perfectly choreographed. You discover that life knows how to live itself, consciousness knows how to be conscious, and intelligence knows how to express itself intelligently, all without your supervision or assistance. Time is a construction of thought, a mental framework imposed on the seamless flow of existence. The present moment has no duration. It is not a brief interval between past and future, but the eternal context in which all apparent time appears. To be free from time is to recognize this eternal now as your natural state, your actual condition, your true home. You have been conditioned to live in psychological time, always referencing what was or projecting what might be, rarely inhabiting what actually is. This creates a fundamental displacement from reality, a sense of always being somewhere else, always missing the life that is actually happening. You live in memories of the past and fantasies of the future, while the present moment passes unnoticed. But watch what happens when you drop out of psychological time completely. In moments of crisis, intense beauty, or deep absorption, the time-bound thinking process stops, and you are simply here, now, present. There is no past casting shadows over the current experience, no future creating anxiety about what might happen. There is only the immediacy of pure presence, the intimacy of direct contact with what is. This timeless awareness is not a special state, but your natural condition when the mind is not projecting itself into time. It is how consciousness actually exists, always present, always immediate, always now. The movement into past and future is a secondary activity, like waves on the surface of a still ocean. Freedom from time does not mean ignoring practical time. Clocks still function, appointments still matter, planning still has its place. But these temporal activities happen within the context of timeless awareness rather than dominating it. You use time rather than being used by it, relate to time rather than being trapped by it. In this freedom, becoming reveals itself as an illusion. You are not becoming enlightened, becoming peaceful, becoming loving. You are the eternal presence in which all apparent becoming takes place. The journey toward a better future is seen to be a movement away from the perfection that is always already here, always already complete, always already perfect. This recognition brings an end to spiritual seeking. What you sought in time is found to be timeless. What you hope to achieve in the future is discovered to be present now. What you thought required development is revealed to be your essential nature, requiring only recognition, not cultivation. The fear of death dissolves in this timeless awareness, because death is seen to be the ending of time-bound identity, not the destruction of what you actually are. The eternal aspect of consciousness cannot die because it was never born. It does not exist in time but as the context in which time appears. This is not a belief or a concept, but a direct recognition available in any moment when the mind stops its temporal projections. Right now, as these words are being heard, there is an awareness that is timeless, immediate, present. This awareness is not in time but prior to time, not developing over time but eternally complete, not moving toward a goal but already arrived at its destination. Past and future are seen to be mental constructions with no reality outside of thought. What you call memory is present thinking about what seems to have happened. What you call planning is present thinking about what might happen. But the thinking is always happening now, in the eternal present that never changes, never moves, never becomes anything other than what it already is. In this timeless awareness, action arises spontaneously, without the delay of decision-making. Response happens immediately, without the interference of calculation. Intelligence operates directly, without the mediation of time-bound thinking. This is not impulsiveness, but the natural flow of consciousness, when it is not obstructed by temporal projections. The beauty of the recognition is that it is always available. You do not need to develop it, achieve it, or maintain it. You only need to notice that underneath all the mental time travel, the timeless awareness is already present, already complete, already free. This is the end of seeking and the beginning of finding, not in time but beyond time, not in the future but right here, right now, in the eternal moment that has never been absent and never will be. In the center of your being burns a flame that has never been touched by the wind of circumstance, never dimmed by the shadows of experience, never threatened by the storms of emotion. This flame is awareness itself, not your awareness, but awareness aware of itself through the apparent lens of your individual existence. This flame is not an object you can perceive, but the very capacity for perception itself. It is not something you have, but what you are at the deepest level. It is not a possession of consciousness, but consciousness knowing itself directly, immediately, without the mediation of thought or experience. You have caught glimpses of this flame in moments of pure presence, when beauty stopped your mind, when love dissolved your boundaries, when silence revealed its fullness, when the ordinary suddenly became extraordinary. In those moments, the flame was not hidden behind the activities of the mind, but shining clearly as the source and essence of all activity. This flame has been burning since before you were born, and will continue burning after your body returns to dust. It is not personal to you, yet it is more intimately you than anything you have ever called yourself. It is not individual, yet it appears as every individual. It is not separate from anything, yet it is the source of all apparent separation. The flame burns without fuel, because it is pure energy, pure intelligence, pure aliveness. It needs nothing to sustain it, because it is the sustaining principle itself. It is never depleted by experience, because it is prior to all experience. It is never diminished by knowledge, because it is the knowing that makes knowledge possible. To recognize this flame is to realize what you have always been seeking. Every desire for happiness, love, peace, or fulfillment has been the flame calling to itself, consciousness seeking to know its own nature, awareness attempting to recognize what it has never actually lost. The flame cannot be cultivated or developed because it is already perfect. It cannot be achieved because you already are it. It cannot be maintained because it is self-maintaining. It can only be recognized, acknowledged, allowed to shine without the interference of the one who thinks they need to tend it. This recognition is not a mystical experience, but the most ordinary thing imaginable, consciousness being conscious, awareness being aware, life being alive. The extraordinariness comes not from the recognition being special, but from realizing that what seemed ordinary is actually miraculous. What seemed common is actually sacred. What seemed separate is actually one. The flame burns equally in every being, behind every face, within every heart. To see it in yourself is to begin seeing it everywhere. To recognize it as your essence is to recognize it as the essence of all existence. To know it intimately is to know that you are never alone, never isolated, never separate from the source of all life. This flame is what looks through your eyes when you see clearly, what listens through your ears when you hear truly, what knows through your mind when understanding arises. It is not you having these experiences, but the flame experiencing through the temporary form that you call yourself. In the light of this flame, all problems are revealed to be shadows, real from one perspective, but having no substance when seen clearly. All suffering is seen to arise from forgetting the flame, and all peace comes from remembering it. All fear dissolves when you realize you are the flame that cannot be extinguished, and all love flows when you recognize the same flame burning in every heart. The flame in the mind is not separate from the flame in the heart, not different from the flame in the body, not distinct from the flame that appears as the entire universe. It is one flame appearing as many, one light refracting through countless prisms, one consciousness exploring infinite possibilities of self-expression. To live from this flame is to live with effortless grace, natural wisdom, spontaneous love. Action arises not from personal will, but from the flame's natural expression. Responses emerge not from conditioning, but from the flame's direct knowing. Understanding flowers not from learning but from the flame's self-recognition. This is the flame that has been calling you home through every experience, every relationship, every moment of beauty or suffering. It is what you have been seeking through every spiritual practice, every philosophical inquiry, every attempt to understand the meaning of existence. The seeking ends when you realize you are what has been seeking. You are what has been sought. You are the flame that burns eternally at the heart of all existence. In the end, there is no end. In the beginning, there was no beginning. There is only this eternal moment, this infinite presence, this immediate aliveness that has never been absent and never will be. To see is to be, and to be is to see. They are not two activities but one seamless movement of consciousness, knowing itself as all that appears. Every word in this exploration has been pointing to what cannot be spoken, describing what cannot be captured in description, thinking about what is prior to thought. The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon, but when you see the moon directly, you no longer need the finger. When you recognize what you are, you no longer need words about what you are. Seeing is not something you do with your eyes, though it includes physical sight. It is not an activity of the mind, though it may be expressed through understanding. Seeing is the very nature of consciousness itself, awareness, aware of itself, being present to its own existence, life awake to its own aliveness. This seeing sees everything as itself. Not that everything is the same, but that everything is expressions of the same source, movements of the same consciousness, appearances in the same aware space. The tree you see is consciousness appearing as tree. The sky you observe is consciousness appearing as sky. The person you encounter is consciousness appearing as person. But more intimately, the one who sees the tree is also consciousness appearing as seer. The observer of the sky is also consciousness appearing as observer. The experiencer of the person is also consciousness appearing as experiencer. Seer and seen are both movements in the same field of awareness, waves in the same ocean of being. This is not a belief to be adopted, but a recognition to be had. It is not a philosophy to be understood, but a reality to be seen. It is not a state to be achieved, but the condition that is always already present, waiting only to be noticed, to be acknowledged, to be lived. To see clearly is to be free, not free from life, but free as life itself, not free from experience, but free as the very capacity for experience, not free from the world, but free as the consciousness in which the world appears. This freedom is not earned through effort, but recognized through understanding, not achieved through practice but revealed through insight. The seeing that liberates sees through the illusion of separation, without denying the reality of apparent diversity. It recognizes the one without obliterating the many. It finds the eternal in the temporal, without escaping from time. It discovers the absolute in the relative, without rejecting the relative. This seeing is always available because it is what you are. You do not need to develop the capacity to see clearly. You only need to stop interfering with the clear, seeing that is naturally occurring. You do not need to become more aware. You only need to recognize the awareness that is already present. In this recognition, seeking ends not in finding, but in the realization that there was never anything lost. The journey concludes not in arrival but in the understanding that you never left home. The path completes not in achievement, but in the seeing that what you sought was what was seeking all along. This is the ultimate insight. Perception and being are one. To see truly is to be completely. To be authentically is to see clearly. What you perceive and what you are cannot be separated, because they are the same movement of consciousness, knowing itself in and as the infinite display of existence. The words end here, but the seeing continues. The concepts conclude, but the reality they point to is eternal. The teaching is finished, but the learning never stops, because life itself is the teacher, and consciousness itself is the student, and the lesson is always the same. You are what you have been seeking. You are what you have been missing. You are what you have always been but had forgotten. To see is to be. To be is to see. In the end, there is no end. In the beginning, there was no beginning. There is only this eternal seeing, this infinite being, this deathless aliveness that you are, that you have always been, that you could never stop being even if you tried. The exploration ends where it began, in the recognition of what was never absent, the remembering of what was never forgotten, the discovery of what was never lost. You are the seeing that sees, the being that is, the awareness that is aware. This is not the conclusion, but the beginning. Not the end of the story, but the recognition that you are the storyteller, the story, and the space in which all stories arise and dissolve. See, be. They are not two. That's it for today. Make sure you're subscribed for the next wild story.